Welcome to Housing for Huntsvillians, the podcast, a podcast about one couple's quest to eliminate homelessness in Huntsville by August 2026. All right, so we're on episode 2 of the Housing for Huntsvillians podcast.
Fantastic. It's good to be here. You set us up with the awesome episode 1 with the video that you put on YouTube that we also posted to the podcast channel.
Yes. And thank you for producing and co-hosting with me for the rest of the podcast.
I'm happy to be here.
Who are you?
I'm Rob. I'm the co-lead for Huntsville New Liberals, and I'm going to be here mainly asking questions because you have vastly more knowledge about this than I do.
I know a lot about housing. I'm learning about homelessness.
It is impressive how much you know about housing, particularly, which you've done. You've actually done this in other cities, like you've done this in San Francisco.
Yes, I did focus a lot of energy learning about housing in San Francisco, and it was fun. But yeah, you're also my partner.
Yes, very, very happy to be here as well.
Yes.
More happy, I would say. Well, definitely more happy.
Depends on the day.
Oh, let me go get a shovel. I'm just going to keep digging holes for myself this entire episode. It's what I do. I'm here for the comic relief.
Yeah. So yeah, I was reminded, I was like, what are we going to do episode 2 on? Because there's so much to cover, just of the things that I've learned in the past month or two. But I was reminded of the quote that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And the first video was really about why I care about this topic. But I realized I left some things out of that video. And one of the things that I left out was that I have never been unhoused, thank goddess. But I have family members who have been unhoused. And I have a lot of experience with unstable, substandard, there's like an official term for crowded housing.
Yeah, you're going to know before I know.
So there's like density, which is good. Well, I think it's just overcrowding. So
yeah, overcrowding.
Yeah, so housing that has more people in it than would be ideal. I've lived in living rooms. I've lived without doors. I've lived 2 people in a living room one time. I've lived with partners who I would not be living with, except that I needed housing. I've lived in areas I didn't want to live in. I've had to move when I didn't want to move because my income did not match the rents that were required. And even when it did, there was always the fear that if I lost my job, if I was in an expensive apartment, I would blow through my savings very quickly looking for another job. So
because that stuff adds up, especially if you're paying over $1,000 a month, like that'll quickly eat through any reserve that you have, or
right.
like any fallback.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I was making 6 figures when I left San Francisco, but I was still living in a 375 square foot studio in the Tenderloin, which is the Tenderloin and some are like the, least pleasant neighborhoods in San Francisco, because I was afraid. I was afraid that if I lost my job, I would run out of money. And I did lose my job shortly after moving to Huntsville. Thank God it was then, because rents are much cheaper in Huntsville.
Dirt cheap compared to California. Oh, yeah. Huntsville's gotten way more expensive than locals are used to, but we've traditionally had it much, much better than the rest of the country. I mean, it is still Alabama, and there's only so expensive you can get in Alabama. But I mean, we are suffering from that. Just to give it, I guess, a quick overview of Huntsville.
So I moved back 2 years ago. You've been here for longer. We both grew up here.
Yeah. And I left for 5 years, but like I left from 2015 to 2020. I came back in January of 2020. Unknowingly right before the pandemic hit. So that kind of ended up being a blessing in disguise, because I don't know how. I was a freelance at the time, and all of my clients disappeared except for one during the pandemic. So that would have, I would have been facing a lot of precarity and potential homelessness as well. If I had not came back here on, which granted, circumstances were great, but that's a story for another time. But yeah, Huntsville is definitely, it used to be really cheap, but we've gotten discovered as a good place to live for a lot of different things. We lost Space Command, which was going to, I wonder if that'll actually affect our home prices.
Well, it will not raise them.
Yeah, we have FBI started moving in here. We have a lot of government jobs, military contractors, things of that nature. So we have a very stable economy, and a lot of people started coming here to also experience that stable economy, I guess, is just a good overview. That and we've also learned how to gentrify and a number of other things. But
well, I mean, it's very simple. We brought in jobs. We brought in employers who brought in jobs, who brought in workers, and we didn't build homes as quickly as we brought in workers. Well, when you have a stable supply and a vastly larger demand, prices rise. So we've seen rents skyrocket since 2016. Even in the past year,
especially in the 2020s, it seems like that curve has gotten steeper and steeper.
Yeah, it's wild how much rents have increased and how quickly. And it's a function of supply and demand. We have to get enough housing to get everyone in a home, or you're going to displace the low-income residents. That's how housing works.
Yeah.
And we are at an inflection point at this point where the things that San Francisco is experiencing and has experienced for a long time, Huntsville is just starting to experience. But if we do not take a different path than San Francisco has taken, we will experience all of those problems and more, and we're going to have less excuse because we already know how this works. We've seen it play out.
So what parallels are you seeing between San Francisco and Huntsville?
Well, first of all, the rising rents, and they're rising for the same reason. We're not building homes as quickly as we're bringing in new people. The people that we're bringing in are much higher income than the people who have already lived here. The people who have lower incomes who were already here are being displaced by the new higher income residents. This is causing quote unquote gentrification. Gentrification refers to where a neighborhood will have bars, restaurants, amenities that serve the residents, the existing residents of that neighborhood. Well, when higher income residents move in, the amenities change. The bars and restaurants usually get nicer and newer. Those residents usually have the clout to advocate for libraries, parks, neighborhood amenities. So what you see is the neighborhoods get nicer. The problem is gentrification, because most cities won't build adequate housing, gentrification usually comes with displacement.
Pushes the existing residents out.
Exactly. So where gentrification does benefit residents in that the existing residents get to use these new, better amenities, better funded, newer amenities. If you don't build enough housing, then instead of allowing the lower income existing residents to enjoy the new amenities, they are displaced. They have to leave. So that's happening. We're seeing increased rates of homelessness. We're seeing increased rates of crime. We're seeing increasing rates of traffic congestion, increasing traffic fatalities, all kinds of problems associated with bringing in residents and not building the infrastructure necessary to accommodate them. I haven't looked into it, but other things that are associated with growing populations and not growing housing stock is you get increases in racial inequality and geographic inequality, where you have, people of one race and one socioeconomic status living in one neighborhood, and these neighborhoods are segregated by race and income. All kinds of negative social ills when you bring in more people than you build housing to accommodate. And we are building a lot of housing, and I think that's wonderful. And people are noting that the housing is all quote unquote luxury. Well, if you have a situation in which your housing production greatly lags population growth, obviously developers are going to develop the most profitable housing first. So you have to fill the luxury demand first. And what makes these apartments luxury apartments is not the finishes. That's not what the main determinant of how expensive housing is. It's the land. These are luxury apartments because the land has gotten more expensive, because there's only a certain small percentage of Huntsville where it's even legal to build multifamily housing. So
it's like 15 to 20% total zoned area. It's multifamily in some way.
Most of Huntsville, that's residential. Vast majority of residentially zoned Huntsville is zoned for single family homes. So we have to fill the luxury demand, and then prices stabilize, and then prices can fall again when supply exceeds demand. That's what is required for prices to fall. But we haven't even met demand yet. So, of course, prices are going to continue to rise until that demand is met.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're definitely in the middle of that process at the moment.
And I think another thing that's really difficult about housing is that, I talked about being in relationships I wouldn't have otherwise been in because I needed housing. When we talk about what happens, to cities who don't build, that kind of thing isn't represented in the data, right? Like increasing rates of domestic violence aren't shown in the data. People staying in homes that aren't near their jobs because they can't afford to rent or buy elsewhere, right? That is difficult to quantify, but is really harmful to the individuals caught in those situations, and harmful to the economy when people stay in jobs they don't want to be in because they can't afford housing near the jobs that they want, or when people are commuting for hours because, again, they can't afford housing near their jobs. That's bad for the environment, it's bad for the economy, it's bad for public health, it's bad for individuals' health. Long commutes are associated with higher rates of divorce, higher rates of depression, higher rates of obesity. It's so multifaceted and so insidious. And the fact that costs of services are rising in Huntsville because people, and this is something that was extremely problematic in San Francisco, is that it was really expensive to go out to eat because every server had to commute for an hour to get to their job because they couldn't afford housing in San Francisco proper. Same thing is happening in Huntsville. It's really hard to afford an apartment when a studio apartment, which there aren't even very many studios here, is $850 a month, and you're making $15 an hour as a server.
Yeah.
That will continue, and those prices will get higher, and those people will commute farther, and the environment will degrade, and public health will degrade, and it's preventable. All this is preventable.
And that's the thing right now, too, is like, because you have, for these luxury apartments, there's such a demand for them that, like, if there's any blip on your credit history, if you're not making a decent bit of money, most of these new apartments aren't even accessible to you because you'll get weeded out in credit checks. You won't have the income to actually justify because they do income checks as well, things like that. So there's issues for sure.
Right, which exacerbates inequality because the kind of people who are going to have, we know that credit agencies have their algorithms and data tends to be racially biased. So, it's so multifaceted and it's so pervasive and it's so just creeps its way into every aspect of life. But anyway, we're not going to totally cover the whole situation now. And again, we are focused on homelessness, but I just wanted to kind of share a little bit about my personal experience with housing insecurity and rent burden. And then in our future episodes, we'll get more into the situation as it is now, the nitty-gritty of the policies, the what it is like to be homeless in Huntsville and things like that. But yeah.
Well, Thank you for sharing all of this awesome data, your backstory. Thank you.
Yeah. Excited.
Looking forward to getting into it.